Welcome back to the modern mystic, where we fall asleep inside the quiet lives of history's greatest minds. Tonight, we settle quietly with David Bowie to rest in the slow spaces of his everyday rituals and to listen for the truth in how he moved through creative solitude. What if genius turned out to be gentle and not loud? What if lasting work was shaped through return, not inspiration? What if greatness was less about moments and more about how presence is practiced when no one is watching? What you'll hear is not a performance, not a story. It's a slow remembrance, each detail drawn from Bowie's day-to-day, from objects left on the dressing table, from motions repeated before the mirror. Everything real, told simply and softly. If you've ever felt behind or wished life would slow down, you'll find understanding in these quiet hours, the slow rhythm of a life lived with devotion, even when it isn't glamorous. You don't have to stay awake. Whether you drift off or only listen for a moment, you'll still be in the presence of this gentle transmission. No pressure, no need to hold on or focus. Just let the room darken, let your mind rest inside the hush, and allow the life of David Bowie to unfold softly all around you. The light in Brixton on January 8th, 1947 was dull and grey, filtering through the window pane onto a modest street. In a quiet room, David Robert Jones entered the world, his first breaths mingling with the cool air of post-war London. The city outside was marked by rubble and endurance, bricks darkened by soot, streets edged with remnants of a time still fresh in the memory of his parents. The war had ended less than 2 years before. Even inside, walls seemed to carry the hush, a kind of pause that settled into everything: blankets, the chipped rim of the teacup, the rough surface of the rug beside the bed. David's childhood unfolded on these softened streets, narrow and persistent, a patchwork of cautious optimism and quiet routine. The sound of footsteps in the hallway, the gentle clink of a breakfast plate, his mother's voice low but sturdy. These became the pattern of early mornings. His father, returning from work, would place his overcoat carefully on the hook near the door, pockets heavy with day-old receipts and worn bus tickets, scents of tobacco and city life trailing behind him. Evenings often meant tea at a simple table. The steam drifted in gentle swirls, threading upward in the wan light. Sometimes the wireless played quietly in the background, simple dance tunes, bits of news, the steady patter of an announcer's voice. David watched the way the radio's cloth covering caught the dust and remembered the shape of music, even before it reached his ears. There was a piano in a neighbor's flat, flaking wood, keys yellowed by use. David would pause during visits, fingers hovering above the white and black, pressing a single note whenever he was allowed. The tone lingered in the air, hung there a little longer than expected, settling into his memory. His parents noticed the way he'd sit quietly, just listening, sometimes humming along to tunes drifting through open windows on warm afternoons. It was a time shaped by ration books and neighborhood routines. The streets were a mosaic of smudges and laughter, children tracing chalk lines on the pavement, skipping stones near the curb. David's world was made up of simple things: the flannel of his school shirt, the tin lunchbox clutched in his hands, the sharp tang of coal fires burning through the cold. At home, his mother sometimes sang softly while folding laundry, her voice a gentle thread that stitched the days together. The first instrument he called his own was not a guitar or piano, but a simple plastic saxophone. He received it as a gift, small, bright, moulded smooth under his fingers. It was light, the reed trembling slightly when he tried for his first note. The sound wasn't precise or grand, but it filled his room with a new kind of wonder. Cultural influences crept in along the margins, quiet but firm. London was changing, even as it recovered. Jazz tunes from America slipped through the airwaves, while British skiffle bands played in local halls. Posters for the latest films appeared on street posts, their corners curled by rain. David noticed it all, the colors, the sounds, the way people hurried and hesitated, remaking their lives in the open spaces left by the war. He returned again and again to the piano's chipped edge, to the smooth surface of his toy saxophone, to the gentle hum of music behind the closed door. Everything was slow, deliberate, a rhythm beneath the ordinary. In these mild beginnings, David learned the shape of listening, the patience of paying attention, and the first traces of becoming. Each day closed quietly, windows glowing in the early dark, voices low and unhurried, the world still dreaming itself awake. There is a small, chipped cup beside the window. In it the light moves gently, not rushing, coloring the oilskin tablecloth with shifting gold. Not far from this cup, Carl's hands rest on a wooden ledge, the grain beneath his palms pressing back, cool and textured. His childhood home settles around him, a modest house, its walls pressed close with the scent of old wool, rain, and a hint of tea left to steep too long. Each morning arrives slowly here, with the muffled shuffle of slippers down a narrow hallway and the hesitant crackling of fire attempting warmth. The world does not hurry, it collects itself, moment by quiet moment, shaping a boy's sense of time. Outside, the garden waits under clouds, soil kept dark by drizzle, the air fresh with the scent of stone and moss. Carl lingers by the window, watching the slow drama of droplets racing one another down the glass. The view, simple, unvarnished, grows familiar. Leafless branches scratch the grey sky, a lonely sparrow pecks at crumbs. What begins as boredom drifts into something softer, a growing awareness of pattern and silence. Even now there is a hush, as if the house itself listens. There are stacks of old books set on the table, their cloth covers worn smooth from many hands. Carl pulls one toward him, feeling the softness of the frayed spine. He runs a finger down a block of rough pages, tracing each tiny ripple, sensing more than reading, letting secrets in through touch. Often left alone, he finds in these pages the shape of invisible things, the script of ancient languages, the long pause between paragraphs, the faint shadow of an underlined word. All these are openings, little seeds dropped in uneventful afternoons. He does not try to understand exactly. He lets impressions gather like dust in the soft corners of memory. Sometimes his mother sweeps quietly through the room, gathering laundry, her hands tugging at linens. The gentle swoosh of fabric against floorboards marks the rhythm of days spent mostly inside. The stillness is punctuated only by chores, idle humming, the occasional sigh. There is love, its presence subtle as a change in light, folded into the everyday. These small moments are what shape a certain kind of soul, one who listens for the hidden messages in silence, who sees how a patch of sunlight on the floor can become a doorway, who senses something calling without words. Inheritance comes not with ceremony, but with repetition. A father's weary glance from across the table, a box of dried herbs by the stove, lines of scripture recited by lamplight. Each carries its own quiet instruction. Carl learns, almost by accident, that every surface remembers the touch, that the world outside the window echoes the world inside. A leaf unfurling, a question left unspoken, the slow settling of warmth around a teacup. What is placed before him in these years is nothing special, but it is enough. The cup, the book, the slight drag of a sleeve across a tabletop, all whisper of unknown paths, quietly nudging, quietly promising. There are moments late in the afternoon when the house grows blue with dusk. Shadows stretch and blur, and Carl, lying on the worn rug, stares at the ceiling boards as they fade. With each breath, he becomes aware of something growing within, a gentle curiosity, the seed of wonder. Destiny does not shout, nor does it unfold all at once. It arrives in these slow accumulations, impressions pressed softly into the clay of childhood. One day, the world will call, and he will answer in the language first spoken here. Patient, observant, woven with the memory of dust motes, linen, and the hush of rain. A pale grey morning touches the window of the Jones family's modest home in Brixton. It's the kind of quiet that settles between the ticking of the clock and the faint footsteps on the kitchen tiles. A home shaped by routines, by Peggy's careful presence, and Haywood's steady work, fingerprints pressed into every detail. David sits quietly on the worn couch, knees drawn close, fabric rough beneath his palms, waiting for the kettle's whistle, the beginning of their day. His mother, Peggy, moves softly. She's deliberate in the way she smooths the tablecloth, her hands always finding small tasks, tiny rituals of order. She works as a waitress, rising before sunrise, her resolve ironed into her uniform. There's a discipline to her, but beneath it, a tenderness flickers. She brings home fragments, stories, laughter, troubles, her days folding into the rhythm of meals, of cleaning, of small comforts. Sometimes her voice lands heavy, full of caution and longing. Her own childhood, marked by absence and hardship, shapes the edges of her words. In the early hours, she quietly prepares bread and tea, careful to leave enough for others. Haywood Jones, or John as most called him, carries himself with reserve. He works for Dr. Barnardo's in charitable housing and holds each responsibility close. He is not expressive, not given to bursts of feeling, but he builds quiet structure, a man who breathes patience into spaces, who believes in order, decency, and the value of showing up. The scent of pipe smoke lingers on his coat, a quiet reminder of evenings spent reading or thinking. He is distant, yet always nearby, a constant background presence. Together, Peggy and Haywood hold a careful balance. Duty and endurance, the old world and the new, never quite overlapping, but always connected by the ordinary tasks of family life. David is sensitive to these 100 daily rituals. Even as a boy, he notices how Peggy's hands tremble on certain days, how she folds worry into her silence, and how Haywood's footsteps slow near the front door when he returns late. In the corners of each room, worry and hope collect, shadows that drift from one generation to the next. There's a hush inside their modest flat, where voices rarely rise, and where feelings are folded away like winter coats. Terry, David's half-brother, is older. He lives on the next floor for a time, draping jazz records over the breakfast table. His presence is both a comfort and a puzzle. Terry is gentle, with kind eyes and a searching mind, often lost in his own world. He pulls David into music, into questions without easy answers. Sometimes they share headphones, listening in silence, feeling the edges of the world blur. Terry brings home books on philosophy and jazz rhythms that float up the stairs into David's room, lingering after the record stops. There are afternoons when the sky is grey, and David watches Terry from his doorway, seeing both the joy and sorrow move across his brother's face like changing weather. There is no drama, only the slow accumulation of feeling. Family becomes a set of weathered pages, mother, father, brother, each carrying their stories, their losses, their ways of coping. David learns by observing. He sees how his mother masks pain with resolve, how his father measures affection in nods and habits, how Terry's curiosities sometimes flicker into confusion. The house is both sanctuary and restraint. Behind every closed door, there are echoes, laughter, hesitancy, snippets of memory that shape the young boy's understanding of who he could become. Evenings bring soft lamplight. The texture of corduroy, the flicker of radio static, the click of a teacup against the sink. Each detail anchors him. Family is the beginning of everything familiar and everything he must someday unravel. It is a place of first questions, first longings, and quiet, inherited strength. There's a hush in the room, barely disturbed by a gentle exhale of breath. A palm rests on the creased edge of a letter, the paper worn thin, carried from childhood, passed through years like a silent companion. On this morning, the soft thread of memory winds backward, carrying Carl Jung to the earliest faces and voices that shaped the quiet grounds of his becoming. The window shows nothing but pale morning. His mother's hands are remembered. They smelled of bread and earth, always moving, always smoothing cloth or settling a cup on the table. Jung recalls the sound of spoons clinking against ceramic, the sturdy wood beneath, and the way his mother hummed to herself in the lull between tasks. The shape of her kindness was in these small gestures, the shape of difference, too, woven into silences at the table where love was present and sometimes distant, like light under a closed door. A parent's anger was quieter than thunder, but it left its own currents in the air. His father's shoes set beside the door, the heavy coat hung straight, brought other lessons: duty, expectation, restraint. In the early hours, Carl would watch his father at the desk, leafing through page after page of sermons, searching for something both obvious and invisible. The study smelled of ink and lamp oil. Each line written was a thread cast, hoping to reach, or maybe just to understand. Both father and son, each alone yet bound by the hush. The family table was its own universe, bread passed by hands that sometimes trembled or lingered. Meals did not always soothe. There were sharp words or eyes turned away, and other times when laughter spilled out and filled every corner, the candles casting simple, warm halos on each face. Even then, companionship mingled with solitude, a fundamental blend that marked Jung's early world. At times, the house echoed with footsteps, Aunt Rassena's brisk heels on flagstone, cousins slipping in to escape the rain. They brought stories, new games, the strange gift of difference. Young Carl would watch them move, puzzling over what made them familiar yet separate, what drew them close and pushed them apart. In these ordinary exchanges, a first understanding grew. Family was more than sameness. It was a vessel for all that we inherit and all that we must transform. Evenings were sometimes long. A chill pressed against the old windows, and Jung found comfort in small rituals, the sorting of marbles, the folding of shirts, the way a single candle gave shape to mystery as shadows stretched along the walls. These quiet moments hinted that the quarrels and kindness, the differences and devotions were all lessons, assignments each person brought into his life, not by choice, but as the earliest curriculum of the soul family gave him language, yes, but it also taught him the weight and difference of words not spoken. There were secrets about belief, about sadness, about hope, folded into the hush of the house. They became the first mysteries, drawn in like breath, to be turned over and examined for years to come. Each tension, each harmony, found its tender counterpart in Jung's later inquiries, the palette for all his thoughts on connection, shadow, and healing. As dawn crept higher, his fingers lingered on the letter once again. The paper was thin, the script faded, a message sent years ago, still carrying the presence of the sender. In this stillness, Jung felt how family was both cradle and crucible, holding him, shaping him, scarred and strengthened by difference. Love was not always gentle, nor wounds cruel. It was the persistent push and pull, the patient, sacred friction needed for transformation. He smoothed the fabric of his sleeve, the gesture both practical and quietly ceremonial, a way of recalling that each soul arrives with assignments woven into blood and memory. The family as vessel, yes, yet never vessel alone. It bore witness to the wounds and also to the awkward, persistent efforts to heal and understand. And in this patient, undramatic forming, the architecture of his life's work began to take shape, one soft, ordinary moment at a time. A small radio sits at the edge of the bedside table, its brown bakelite cool to the touch in the chill of a South London morning. Behind the thin curtains, clouds shift lazily above Brixton rooftops. Before school, David leans close, pale fingers winding the dial between bands, searching for something that feels like an opening. Sometimes it's the thrum of skiffle, woolly and rough, sometimes a thin, longing clarinet line from a distant jazz station. The music seems half in this room, half somewhere far away. He lifts a schoolbook idly, tracing a doodle of men in sharp suits and pointed shoes drawn in the margin. The desk is cluttered, blunt, chewed pencils, a worn exercise book. Yesterday's tea mug stained with rings, and he spends more time with drawings and lyrics than arithmetic. Letters from American magazines, hidden beneath an old scarf, rustle every time he reaches for his notebook. He pores over photographs of musicians, the impassable shape of their hair, the confidence of their poses, the fabrics catching stage lights. He wants to know the feeling, how it would be to slip into that world, to feel velvet or leather against his skin, to be witnessed. There is an ache behind his eyes, soft but insistent, a heaviness that visits most evenings while turning over a battered jazz record in his lap. The crackle of vinyl, the worn gold label. His thoughts drift to cool, smoke-filled clubs he's never seen, hands flicking the edges of a paper program he's found, its ink smudged like a memory not quite his. Jazz is not only sound, but movement. It is an invitation and a secret. Sitting on the floor, his legs crossed, he mimics the way a man might lean into a bass note, or the way a woman laughs into her song. Each imitation is a rehearsal for departure. He keeps a harmonica in the palm of his hand, thrumming the metal with his thumb as if to summon the unknown. Softly, he breathes across it, the note barely rising above the hush of the house. There's the worn edge of wallpaper beneath his elbow and a chipped enamel mug nearby. He stares at the ceiling, thinking of the boundary between this narrow room and some other, brighter place. It is as if he is pressing at the walls with only his voice. In the evenings, when his father brings home stray records from work, often American, sometimes stamped with radio call signs, David sits beside the player, studying every cover. He feels the uneven texture of paper under his fingertips, the ink half rubbed away from years of being passed along. These objects are not possessions, but messages. He listens closely, letting the static and horn lines seep in, certain that life can be rearranged. That sound can be escape. He will later say that he didn't know what the word was for what he wanted, only that he could hear it in music. Before bed, in the reflection of a dusty round mirror balanced on the windowsill, he adjusts his hair, practicing ways to smile, to scowl, shy not with his image, but with the hope that it might one day belong elsewhere. The lamplight catches everything subdued. A worn sweater, the curve of a bottle, the silence between records. He lingers here, patient and uncertain. Longing in these early hours is silent work, tucked into rhythms, objects, small acts repeated each day. It is the hush that comes before new sound, and the quiet discovery of something unspoken, carried gently and alone. A row of worn notebooks lies open on the small dressing table. Karl's hand rests for a quiet moment on the cover of the oldest one, its corners softened by years of touch. There's a shallow indentation on the wooden table edge, pressed by his forearm in countless mornings just like this. The faint scent of ink hovers, carrying with it a restless energy. As dawn deepens, light moves in stripes across the floorboards, finding dust in the air. Karl closes his eyes in a pause, breath slowing. The silence isn't empty, it's full of old questions, urgings that never quite settle. Every artist he once mused on paper moves forward under the push of some gentle ache. Not ambition, not achievement, but longing itself. The sense that enough is never quite enough, that each phrase and gesture opens to more. His fingers trace the line of a lyric scribbled hastily weeks before, now circled and reworked in the margin. Nearby, a battered harmonica glints in a pool of cool light. Karl's hand lingers over it, remembering the familiar bite of metal in the palm, the shallow breath pressed through reed. There is no audience here, no one to impress. He plays a single note as if testing an old memory. The sound is soft, unfinished, a question in the air rather than an answer. Outside the single window, a muted city holds its breath. Karl studies his reflection in the small round mirror. He is older than he feels, younger than he knows. There is a certain hunger in the gaze, not for attention, but for something deeper, a unity between the person alone and the persona he'll inhabit before the footlights tonight. He smooths the fabric of his costume with quiet care, noting the worn places at the seams. Each imperfection, each patch, a record of nights spent dissolving into another self, and then returning, always returning, to this private ache. The leather binding of his favorite record is cracked, the spine held by tape. Karl pulls it from the stack and listens for the faint, familiar hiss before the first note. The act of listening feels almost holy, a devotion to the unfinished, the unwritten, the spaces between, the emptiness that waits each morning patient. In this gentle ache there is motion, but no hurry, a trust that longing itself is the companion of becoming. He lets the morning quiet move through him, holding everything, the missing, the possibility, the endless small attempts. Each ritual touching the notebooks, running fabric over his palm, closing his eyes beside the cold mirror, becomes a silent invocation. Longing here isn't an emptiness to be filled. It's the quiet room itself, a sacred space inside the movement of his days. He sits and breathes and does not rush the ache away. In the pale blue hush before rehearsal, hands rest quietly on a battered suitcase, its clasps worn smooth, its corners softened by train station dust. Just outside, a city stirs, but inside this makeshift dressing room, time slows. Fingers drift over a pamphlet from another band, the Conrads, one of many names pressed into the past like old linen. The logo, faded and too elaborate, barely hints at risk taken, posters pinned, hopes stretched taut and thin. A scrap of paper sits gently atop a stack of lyric sheets, bearing another name, another band, the King Bees. The band didn't last, and neither did the single. The paper smells faintly of ink and rain, its edges curled from years inside coat pockets. No one called. The tracks, Lisa Jane, and others, came and went nearly unnoticed. They are here only as memory, softened and silent, like a threadbare scarf draped over a wooden chair. A thin record sleeve slips across the surface of the vanity, catching dim dawn light. Here is another effort, another transition. Davy Jones, then David Jones, then something else entirely. The old name gets set down, set aside, a shell left behind on the sand. Even the compact mirror reflects uncertainty. When success seemed to move elsewhere too quickly, he remained, adjusting the angle, smoothing a lapel, humming softly to fill the room. Next to a kettle cooling on a side table, a stack of returned letters. Each one carries polite regret, details blurred over time. One, creased from folding and refolding, names a single that no one picked up. Tea steam drifts above the cup, warm breath in cool air. The scent comes and goes, reminding him that patience is a kind of courage. Each rejection sits gently in the quiet, neither shame nor anger, just the simple truth of going unseen for a while. A pair of stage shoes, soles scuffed, wait beside a frayed suitcase. Each day a new chance, even if the door never opens. There is ritual in the repetition, tightening laces, scanning the day's schedule, practicing lines with a voice unchanged by applause or disappointment. The old notes are set aside, but never thrown away. There's an intimacy in letting failures become part of the room, something woven softly into the fabric of being. In this hush, he is becoming and unbecoming, again and again. The radio in the corner murmurs a song by someone else. Hands pause, breath slows. He listens to the sound, then turns inward, feeling a lesson in the waiting. Endings are seldom final. There is always another morning, another slow, steady beginning. Here in the soft light before day fully breaks, the dressing room feels even quieter in the hour after disappointment. Carl sits with his elbows leaning on the cool wood of the vanity, the tips of his fingers pressed lightly together. His breath lands softly in the hush, but his mind replays a scene. The moment of misstep, the ring of hollow applause that follows when a performance hasn't lived up, the heat of quiet embarrassment lingering on his cheeks. The mirror reflects only a tired set of eyes, ringed in half-light, stubborn and searching. He lets himself settle, sinking a little into the chair, the fabric beneath him holding its old gentle imprint. The page he'd rehearsed, now resting on his lap, with a corner bent, marked by the heavy trace of an earlier thumb. His pencil sits aside, worn almost flat, wood chipped from worry and use. The surface of the page bears brief hesitation, soft erasures, ghostly remnants where a phrase had almost stayed, then didn't. There is no rush, only repetition, feeling, erasing, rewriting. The low lamp casts a slow golden haze over the gathering clutter, costume cloth folded in patient layers, a chipped harmonica positioned just so, a glass of water faintly smudged at the rim. The air is quiet enough to let failures breathe. There is no noise of rescue here, only the still weight of what did not work. He lingers inside the hollow space where certainty used to live. Every old notebook on the table is marked by lines that never became songs, lyrics that twisted in on themselves. Yet he keeps them all, arranged side by side, the rubble and the raw material. He does not resist what has ended. The heavy feeling, the disappointment, becomes not a thing to escape, but a companion. He touches the edge of a battered makeup compact and remembers other failed nights, years before, sitting almost exactly like this. The feeling familiar but never final. It is the presence of a setback, not its absence, that starts a new alchemy. In the private dawn, the polarity between failure and possibility sharpens. He feels the dip, then, subtle as a shift in wind, the mind begins to turn. Not forward, not toward display, but inward, deepening, refining. Mistakes become material. Setbacks become sandpaper, rough but clarifying. There is something sacred in admitting what has fallen short without forcing a new answer. The objects on the table do not speak, but they wait. His hands, slower now, move among them without the urge to fix, only to be with what is. The edge of the page, the condensation where his thumb has pressed the glass, the familiar creak of the chair beneath him. He sees that failure is not a closing, but the fire that quietly remakes the metal. No need to rise before readiness. No need for false hope. Only rest inside the turning, the moment when nothing is certain and nothing is wasted. In this mirror, under this thin pool of dawn, he meets himself again, older but softer, his gaze steady, as if to say, "This too makes you. This too is the work." A quiet, filtered light presses against the window pane, early, gray, and almost formless. Bowie is already awake, his hands smoothing the sleeve of a faded shirt, the buttons cool between his fingertips. On the table, a row of battered notebooks, one with a torn edge, another blotched by a tea stain, rest beside a pencil worn down almost to its ferrule. He sits, the chair legs steady against the wooden floor, and opens the newest page. The air in the room carries something habitual, the faint smell of graphite, the stillness before a thought becomes a line. He starts with fragments, words caught in margins, tiny sketches, stray phrases underlined in the half-light. Instead of reaching for something new each time, he circles back. A word from last week, penciled and then erased, returns to the surface. Each phrase is spoken out loud into the quiet, letting it gather weight. Again, again. The sound of the pencil moving, a whisper against the paper, fills the room more than any song. There are records stacked at his feet, sleeves worn down from handling. He lifts one, feeling for the familiar groove with careful, slow fingers. He does not rush. Bowie's practice was never about speed, but about coming back, song after song, rehearsal after rehearsal. Musicians who spent time with him recall the hours spent not on stage, but in these sorts of spaces, replaying the same chord progression, humming the melody quietly, the repetition somehow making the work softer, more lived in. The notebook is closed, then opened again. The same line, rewritten from memory. Outside, the faintest chill seeps in around the window frame. He wraps his hand around a mug of tea, the warmth grounding him back into the moment, into the work that so rarely announces itself as genius. It's often just the discipline of not moving on, of remaining inside the marrow of a lyric until it fits, even if hours slide by unnoticed. In the years between records and tour, the rhythm never really changed. Studio logs would show entire mornings given over to the same section of a song, not to achieve perfection, but to settle into the imperfect human version that felt real in his bones. He allowed himself to become almost invisible inside the pattern, the scratching of pencil, turning over an idea, correcting it, letting it rest, then returning again. There is no performance here, only the lived meditation of making, undoing, and remaking. Even the battered harmonica kept at the edge of the table has its place in the ritual. Lifted, tested, put down. It speaks not of flash or novelty, but comfort, each note familiar, as if it holds the memory of every practice before this one. The slow, habitual devotion to rehearsal deepens the air, reminding that greatness is only ever a matter of gentle, repetitive tending. Time passes, another page is filled, another chord turned over in silence, and the day begins without hurry, quietly becoming itself. The quiet in the dressing room deepens with the soft glide of fabric under steady hands. Carl Jung sits, repeating small motions, a fold here, a smoothing there, allowing the tactile world to hold his focus. The surface of the mirror blurs gently in the slanting dawn, his reflection softened by breath. It is not the first morning of such preparations, nor will it be the last. Each action, however modest, is a return to a beginning that never quite ends. He reaches for one of the old lyric pages resting beside a chipped makeup compact. The thin paper crackles faintly. Jung's eyes move slowly over the lines as if he is reading them for the first time, though he has read them countless mornings before. The words move through him, imperfect and familiar. In the hush, the subtle scratches of his pencil revise a phrase, erasing and writing again. There is no hurry, just presence. Every word offered with care, every change small but deliberate nearby. The battered harmonica catches the early light. He picks it up, the grooves and dents beneath his thumb marking years of practice. A single, drawn breath fills the silence. The note lingers and fades. He repeats the passage, each time listening, each time settling more fully into the simplicity of practice. Not aiming for mastery, but for the steady companionship of the motion itself. The table smells faintly of old cedar and oil, years of objects arranged and rearranged, each placement precise and quiet. A notebook opens to a page scored with lines of music and gesture. Here, practice is neither performance nor drudgery. It is the rhythm of returning, again and again, to scales, to silent recitations, to the steady recrafting of a lyric. Sometimes his lips move in time. Sometimes he is still, a soft reflection comes, unhurried. Repetition is not just how the craft is held, but how the spirit is shaped. The body learns, yes. Fingers remember the path of melody or the crease of a costume. But repetition also shapes the inner world. Each return, gentle and honest, polishes something within, draws forth patience, humility, willingness to begin anew. In the motion itself, prayer happens, a devotion without words, just breath and hands and slow, attentive presence. As the light grows brighter, the worn notebooks feel heavier with memory. There is no arrival, only another circle through the morning's rituals. Jung lingers before the mirror, fingertips tracing the outline of his jaw, face washed in dawn. He repeats the motions without impatience. The purpose settles not in the perfection of the act, but in the act itself. practice as a quiet meditation, a daily remembering that the path is made by walking and walking again, letting each simple repetition become its own quiet blessing. A quiet hour settles in, and there, beneath the pale lamp glow, he lifts the edge of a linen handkerchief from a wooden tray. The room is sparse, yet textured by use. Glass water tumbler half full, a small black notebook thick with dog-eared corners, the faint scent of worn leather. In this private space, routine is not performance. It is almost reverence, done for himself alone. David's books fill an old battered case by the side table, their spines soft and their pages marked by careful, faded pencil. Philosophy texts and postmodern poetry, small print art catalogues from places he once slipped into on rainy London afternoons, biographies banded with receipts and ticket stubs, softly humming the private sound of living. When he reads, sometimes at first light before rehearsal, he sits hunched by the window, elbows on knees, letting the street's muted sounds drift in feet on wood, breath quiet, the words cupped in his palm. It is not just pleasure or even preparation. There is a hungry, dependable devotion here, the kind that shapes curiosity into something physical, like muscle grown daily in secret. On a shelf beside the mirror, rows of small objects collect dust patiently. A Japanese woodblock print, corners curling from years of thumb tacking and repositioning. A delicate silver ring. Scraps of handwritten theater programs, folded and refolded until the creases become memory themselves. The artist's collection is not rare or ostentatious, but thoroughly loved. Each piece placed quietly, sometimes moved a millimeter left or turned to catch the changing light. The habit is nearly invisible. No one is watching, which is why it matters most. Tending the beloved, remembering the line between possession and presence. Costumes rest on simple wooden hangers, draped with care so that wool, silk, and velvet do not crease or fade. He smooths the shoulder seams with flat, deliberate hands, checking for stray threads, lifting a collar, brushing away a faint trace of powder with a lint-free cloth. His fingers linger on patterns and fastenings, arranging each garment as if it holds a key to a memory nearly forgotten. Unseen devotion is slow, not for the stage, but as morning prayer might be, contemplating transformation one stitch, one button at a time. The tin of shoe polish sits cool in his palm, a ritual for leather boots that have crossed so many stages, every scuff a record of movement, every shine a quiet promise to himself. The air smells faintly of cedar from blocks tucked inside to hold their shape. Layer by layer, a careful, unhurried polish. He hums under his breath, a single line repeated, letting the wax settle into creases. This is where the larger work begins, in the details no one will ever see. Objects bear the print of his hands long after he finishes, the sleeve of a jacket pressed smooth, the spine of a paperback soft around the curve of his thumb. None of this is rushed. The clock on the wall ticks, but does not chase him. Here, in quiet ritual, greatness is built in small movements, and the morning outside continues on, unseen by all but the careful, sacred eyes within this room. A battered notebook rests on the corner of the vanity, its spine soft, its corners curled inward like hands returning to prayer. Young lifts it, careful not to disturb the neat stacks of papers beneath. The texture of the cover, warm from hours in the lamplight, meets his palm with the familiar comfort of old ritual. He does not hurry. The page edges are mottled, offering the grainy resistance of 1,000 turnings. He opens to a spread where blurred ink forms careful lines, each word a result of hours unseen, a slow shaping of insight, doubt, and quiet return. Even the smallest corrections, the scratch out of a syllable, feel like private reverence, a conversation carried inward while the city outside waits for morning. There is no audience here, not yet, only inward presence. The room is woolen with hush. The clock's second hand, the faint hum of a radiator under the window, the sharp tang of graphite at his fingertips, all these accompany him as steadily as breath. He consults another sheaf of pages, aligning them just so. Under the raw ceiling beams, he pulls a pencil stub, worn thin from use, and jots one more note along the margin. The pencil's shavings curl softly onto the wood, fragile, weightless, like unspoken intentions. The costume jacket hangs close by, pocket heavy with a harmonica, its brass dulled by touch. Young runs his thumb over it, feeling the residue of evenings past, a trace of warmth, oil, music not yet played. He polishes a button, absently, with the edge of his sleeve. Each action quiet, precise, he is not preparing to be seen. He is honoring what cannot be seen. This, too, is work. This moment is neither rehearsal nor performance. It is a devotion, plain as folded cloth and steam rising from his morning tea. Attention settles on the ritual, smoothing linen, stacking books, circling one awkward word to return to later. As sunlight rises, just a thin spill across the mirror's rim, the labor does not announce itself. It dwells beneath in longing and return, lining up the smallest things so the intention of the day might emerge clear. There is not a single gesture wasted, no movement rushed. The devotion is hidden, but it is what brings light to the hours. Greatness is not in show nor in applause, but in the purpose gently given to each act, even, perhaps especially, the ones no one else will ever see. A clean, white hotel mug rests on a lacquered bedside table. Outside, the city is still unfamiliar. Berlin, 1976. The mug is warm in Bowie's hand, steam rising as softly as memory. He sits in a sunlit square of the hotel's wooden floor, a stack of ruled paper on his knee and a black marker poised, always poised, to start again. His slippers are worn, the same two shirts alternate day after day. Each morning and late into night, his reflection in the window is slightly different, sharper, hungrier, quietly obsessive. He arranges his cassettes into neat lines, tapes marked with hasty labels. Idea 3, Fragment 5, Chorus Scary. The ritual is careful, each tape rewound just so, stacked by order of urgency. His desk is not cluttered, just precise, every object set down and picked up at a measured, almost sacred interval. There are no accidents. Every sound must be heard again and again. The room smells faintly of cigarette smoke and the page of a fresh lyric notebook. He turns a battered harmonica over in his palm, the metal cool against skin. The silence is not empty. Across the glass, the city moves slowly. And here inside, Bowie is working through another life. Evening finds him at the console in Hansa's studio, headphones settling over lank hair as two engineers ready the tape. The machinery whirs softly. Layer after layer, tracks are recorded, rewound, and replayed. When he sings, it is with an intensity that does not allow for the casual. Every phrase is tried different ways. He leans close to the microphone. Breath catches against foam. Sometimes a line is sung 50 times. Sometimes, after hours, he erases all but one fragile take and starts again. No impatience, just a looping, relentless devotion, tracing the edge of his own limits. In this season, Bowie's creative output quickens past the ordinary. New personas arrive not in costume first, but in small, private decisions. How he slouches against a window pane, which record he leaves on repeat all night. Thin white Duke, the Berlin-era self. They emerge first in the angle of his neck, the pause before he answers a question, the coldness of an untouched coffee. Persona is not escape, it is expansion. He handles a chipped makeup compact, thumb tracing the hinge, watching as powdered residue settles on the table. Each layer, a way to become more porous, letting the city's grey light and the room's hush find their way into the shape of song. By now, sleep comes late, if at all. The boundary between day and night is only the closing of a sketchbook or the reshuffling of records. A new line, a riff, an unfinished fragment waiting for dawn. On the wall, morning returns in a dull, steady blue. Bowie smooths out a page, wipes his hands on linen pants, and starts in again. The rituals persist. A teacup still warm. The gentle rethreading of tapes, the undressing of yesterday's persona, moment by moment. Genius in these dim stretches is not spectacular. It is a lived, almost tedious repetition, a slow becoming, anchored in repetition, stack of notebooks, careful breathing, and the willingness to revise, even when the world is asleep. Even when the work feels like it might break him, he continues. In the solitude between takes, identity is not found. It is rehearsed, discovered in the quiet devotion to that next untested note. The air inside the dressing room remains gentle, as if holding its breath around the smallest acts. There's a tangle of ribbons, those used to tie back the cuffs of his costume, soft and fraying at the edges, their texture pressed again and again between practiced fingertips. The fabric soaks up a bit of dew that sneaked in from the cracked window before dawn, grounding each slow movement with the trace of early morning chill. Every repeated adjustment, bow retied, collar straightened, a sleeve pulled smooth, carries the memory not just of today, but 1,000 mornings before this one, where intention and quiet perfection have met. In the hush, obsession feels almost tender, a devotion formed from careful noticing, even when no one is looking. On the small table by the mirror, a battered notebook lies open, the spine bearing the signature creases of devotion. Every page thick with ink, overlapping where a line has been tried, crossed out, written again. His thumb follows the edge, pausing on the page that resisted him yesterday. There is comfort in the slow rewriting, the steadiness of fixing one word at a time. The lamp's bulb casts a gold pool over the paper, making the notebook's ragged corners gleam gently. This small ritual, the work of returning, is both discipline and longing, the kind that clarifies as much as it consumes. The urge to complete, to find the true phrasing, burns and soothes in equal measure. There's a chipped teacup on the sill, a remnant from the night before. The faint scent of bergamot lingers in its porcelain grooves, grounding the drifting mind. A sip taken is a pause, a moment for the heat to remind the body of itself. He listens to the breath that moves quietly within his chest. Sometimes, when the mind chases perfection far into the night, the body asks to be remembered, to be restored. Obsession, when it flares unchecked, dries the well. There is a line between having fire enough to create and letting the fire burn the shelter meant to nurture the spirit within. He reaches for the harmonica, still slightly cool, in its weathered case. His fingers hesitate, feeling the groove worn smooth, where it's been held so many mornings before. The instrument is an anchor, a promise that spark and structure can embrace one another. There is restraint in the way he runs through a scale, never rushing, letting each note settle before inviting the next. The music moves quietly, echoing the patient beat of a heart in balance, not too harsh, not too soft. In this, he is reminded that creation is not only force, but boundary, the vessel that holds the fire gently so that it warms without consuming. The mirror keeps watch over every motion, holding both the fatigue under the eyes and the spark that refuses to dim. Here, in the quiet glow, the pull between becoming and resting grows visible, made plain in the careful tending to each object. The work, the love, and the let go all entwine, inviting him into the space between fullness and emptiness. Only in that space can inspiration keep returning, quietly renewed and realigned. The genius that is flame does not need to destroy. Sometimes it is enough that it glows warmly as dawn climbs up the window pane, the low dawn filtered through a smudged window, making the glass look almost blue. On the small wooden chair beside the sink, a letter sat, folded and opened many times, the crease nearly worn through. He ran his hand across the paper, fingertips resting in the dent where a signature pressed too hard. Letters like this arrived less often as the years wore on, a shape of absence woven into the rhythm of his mornings. When the light hit the mirror, he saw not just his reflection, but the gradual drawing away. The way phone calls grew shorter, the silence on the other end holding more weight than any word. Relatives, patient at first, became distant, tired of waiting on the moments he could offer. Friendships, once lived in rooms thick with laughter and smoke, thinned into brief exchanges, familiar addresses slipping into memory between rehearsals and late-night writing. Rain had left a faint mark on the windowsill, where he sometimes rested a warm mug between his palms. The weight grounded him during these quiet spells, when company was only imagined, conjured from the ghosts of conversations past. Costume fabric draped across the armrest reminded him of the hours spent away, traveling, rehearsing, returning after long stretches, his scent replaced by mothballs and time. The familiar pattern of solitude deepened with every engagement. He learned slowly to eat alone in quiet kitchens after a show, the scrape of a fork on ceramic louder than any applause he left behind. Sometimes the echo of crowds would linger hollow after he set down his battered harmonica. Yet, in those solitary moments, the admiration felt distant, out of reach, part of another life. Public eyes followed, always watching, sometimes judging, sometimes demanding more than he could give. There was comfort in the worn leather of his notebook, in the ink that bled through, but it was not the same as being truly seen. Private joys, the ritual of arranging a chipped compact or tucking a liner note into his pocket, offered a quiet companionship but could not fill the space left by strained bonds. It became harder over time to recall the forgotten birthdays or the missed milestones that marked the passage of years. Each object on the table stood as a reminder. Devotion had its cost, and sometimes the price was paid with silence and rooms that were too still. Yet as the light moved across the floor, he kept to the ritual, touching each thing with intention. The world waited beyond the door. For now he watched the dust float through the narrow beam, taking in what had quietly slipped away without anger, just with a kind of tender acceptance. The solitude was real, a companion and a cost. The balance was never perfect, not for him, not for anyone who gave themselves, quietly, to a calling that demanded more than it could ever return. There is a hush in the room, broken only by the movement of hands across familiar surfaces. The morning's light touches the chipped makeup compact sitting by the dressing mirror, its edge worn smooth by years of careful fingers. Jung's gaze lingers on the trace of his own reflection, softer now, the sharpness of youth exchanged for the weathered certainty of age. In this quiet, the mark of every exchange comes forward. Each notebook stacked nearby, the leather worn thin, the paper spotted from damp air, holds not just thoughts preserved, but blank pages where questions remain unanswered. Sometimes Jung misses the eagerness that once burned through his nights, the sense that every idea carried forward would never return unchanged. The harmonica, battered and out of tune, lies heavy on the table. Its reed breathes no music this morning. Years ago, his hands found comfort in its sound at the window after a day's work. Now, it stays silent, an emblem of all that cannot come back. These objects, cherished yet separated from their origins, seem to say that to gain new ways of seeing, something of the old must always be left behind. He smooths the costume fabric once more, fingertips memorizing the subtle phrase at the cuffs. There are colors that fade, favorite blues that once brightened rehearsals, now dulled to gray by sweat and by sun. He feels this fading not only in cloth, but in himself, recalling moments when enthusiasm quivered like a too bright flame. To become who he is now, he had to allow parts of himself to slip away quietly. The liner notes, grease-stained and curling at the corners, are set beside the records. Some names on those pages belong to friends who moved on, or who never understood the odd silence he carried in his solitude. Each memory of kinship is paired with the gentle ache of absence, each joyful hour balanced by the space that follows after. Jung sits, knowing that every reunion on these lines brings a shadow where a voice has gone quiet. The mirror's edge glints as he turns a notebook over. The pattern repeats. For every entry carefully written, there's something erased, a half-remembered thought or story that never made it to the page. Loss is constant here, not sudden but slow. The loss of voices grown gentler, the loss of chance, the surrender of the comfort of certainty. And yet he senses, even here, that each shadow granted a gift, patience, humility, the readiness to begin again. He takes a breath. Cool air from the window stirs a faded curtain. It reminds him softly, nothing is taken without return. To walk the soul's path is to agree to this exchange, over and over, letting moments fall away so that something truer might quietly take their place. In this pale dawn, with hands on simple things, he welcomes both the echo and the emptiness, what was lost and what was given, as if, beneath it all, they always belonged together. A radiator hums low against the quiet morning. Outside the window, the London streets are hushed with mist, their edges blurred and unhurried. Inside, on a battered little side table, sit an array of prescription bottles, their labels upright, lined like chess pieces. Bowie's hand travels toward them, careful and steady, the press of his fingertips against cool plastic anchoring his first action of the new day. There is nothing dramatic in the gesture, just routine, and the small weight of remembering to care for his own body. The mug he reaches for next is chipped at the rim, its tea bags never fully drained. They leave faint ghosts of their presence in brown rings, reminders of endless mornings spent in quiet, domestic repetition. Sunlight slides across a leather notebook splayed open beside his cup. The paper has gone soft at the edges, creased and faintly yellow, where his thumbs turn the same page once, then again. The spine no longer snaps but bends, welcoming the familiar. Notes in sloped handwriting drift across the lines. There are days, Bowie thinks, when he hardly notices his own voice anymore. It seems dulled by the noise of the world, so different from the early years when every idea felt urgent, every lyric sharp. Here, in this later era, repetition softens things. It doesn't erase their meaning. It simply makes them quieter. Family photographs linger on the walls. Lexi's artwork clipped up beside a photo of a summer in Central Park. Faces caught in half laughter. The stillness wraps around him, warm as old wool. Public life has grown distant, deliberate, like pulling a shutter down, letting only certain light filter through. There are fewer interviews now, fewer flashes of staged excitement. Instead, he shells peas with Lexi in the kitchen, his hands marked with age, and the shell's texture rough against his palm, tiny, ordinary moments given presence. Breathing feels easier when it is slow some mornings. He sits at an upright piano, the keys a little sticky with age, and the lacquer dulled. No audience is expected. The music is private. Here, Bowie's creativity moves inward, circling the same few chords, sometimes humming half melodies that don't ask to be finished. The sound is enough, a kind of prayer, repeated but never quite the same. He knows his body is not as quick. Cancer's reality moves underneath each gesture, slowing the day, insisting on patience. Inevitably, as dusk folds into the sitting room, he picks up old lyric pages. Some are spotted with coffee. Others are torn at the margin where mistakes were erased again and again. The texture of that paper is a kind of memory, the same as breath, always present, but rarely noticed. Family moves in and out quietly, the hush in the house protective. Bowie no longer tries to be everywhere or for everyone. Instead, he listens more, really listens, when someone speaks. There's a peace in being ordinary at the end of each day, smoothing out a shirt, putting records back on the shelf, stacking books in a neat pile. It is an act of reverence, evidence of a life that, finally, is measured by its quiet steadiness. He lingers in these private rituals, grateful for the luxury of doing less, for the gift of ordinary devotion to those he loves. Here, as the years gather gently, every small hinge and creak of his home becomes another place to rest, another invitation to remember that meaning, real meaning, is not loud. It arrives softly in each repeated step. The chair beneath him is heavy, edges worn soft by decades of habit. Sitting still, Carl notices how the fabric's give is different now. Less spring, more body. One palm rests in his lap, warmth of skin on woolen trousers. He is older. The quiet here is no longer something he pushes against. It is roomy. A shaft of grey light crosses the tabletop and touches the rim of his teacup. The porcelain's curve shines, cold to the fingertips, then slowly warming as he holds it. His lips press gently against the edge, the taste of weaker tea, second steeping, light and unsweetened. There's comfort in the way small rituals, repeated over thousands of mornings, shed their importance and become simply presence. His reflection in the small round mirror catches his gaze from time to time. The lines, so many now, run calmly across his cheeks, gathering in soft circles beneath his eyes. He does not search for his old face. There is space, finally, to greet the version that remains. Time has stripped many identities. The teacher, the analyst, the young doctor. He is not performing them now. In this quiet he meets himself, a little closer to the center, a little less bound by roles. Aging is not subtraction, he thinks, but the distilling of what truly remains when all the costumes have been set aside. He lets his hands drift across the battered harmonica on the dressing table. Its surface remembers evenings of breath and modest music. His fingers, stiff with age, press it just enough to hear the hushed metal sigh. There's something sacred in handling an old object without any ambition, just an acknowledgement of all the stories absorbed over years of simple use. He no longer needs to improve or to impress. The impulse for becoming has surrendered to being. The room grows softer. There's a graying record sleeve near the lamp, soft cardboard bent at the corners. He turns it over once, twice, reading the faded print. He is not chasing novelty or perfection. That longing falls away, leaf by leaf, as the inner seasons turn. Now the grace is in watching what remains, in letting the moment speak rather than filling it with plans. Some of his journals have not been opened in months. He places a palm on top of the pile. The stories held inside no longer press for his attention, their urgency is gone. Instead, he listens to the hush of his own breath coming and going. The theater of identity, so urgent, so dramatic in youth, seems only a costume left backstage. The dawn outside is slow and blue, pressing gently at the glass. Carl's mind moves at the same unhurried pace. He is here in the smallest motions, teacup, mirror, sleeve, breath, a soul quietly settling into essence. His life has narrowed, but not diminished. The meaning deepens in the plainest moments. As he rests, he feels the boundaries blur between roles, between stories, between beginnings and endings. This is the tender grace of aging, a slow, patient descent into what cannot be named, but only lived. A yellowed lyric sheet rests against the cool tabletop. The edges are soft, marked by the weight of the hands that have turned it over many mornings, searching for something both remembered and unfinished. Across the page, lines unfurl in a jagged script, words that seem to drift between waking and sleeping, each one shaped slowly, without haste or certainty. The morning is silent except for the shifting of paper, the muted drag of a pencil reworking a phrase that once arrived at dusk in a spare London flat. Bowie's hands move methodically, almost reverently. He glances at a battered cassette recorder nearby, sunlight glancing off its plastic buttons, and the moment hovers, unhurried, thick with quiet possibility. On the wall, an album cover, rich midnight hues swirling through splinters of silver, stares back into his reflection. The mirror's surface is blurred by the dawn's fog, but the suggestion of colored lightning bolts and androgynous cheekbones remains. Each visual is tied to a real output, a photograph from a session, a painted mask from the exhibition, the costume's stitched seam felt beneath his fingers. He leans closer to the glass, arranging the makeup compacts beside a chipped mug. The brush moves slowly, painting a familiar design, a pale streak, the shadow of a star. In the quiet, he recalls the moment backstage when the first line took shape, how it felt unremarkable, even mundane, to chase a melodic phrase that didn't yet know it was a refrain. One foot presses gently against the cool wood floor. The notebook beside him is filled with vignettes, sketches of sound, and light interwoven with scraps of dream, all catalogued by hand. There are drawings tucked between pages, fractured moons, eyes floating in pools of blue ink, repeated circles and fragmented scripts. Each motif emerged not through a flash of vision, but days spent moving objects upon objects, repositioning the record sleeve or rearranging collections of cheap plastic figurines along the windowsill, letting strangeness become familiar. Within the stack of records on the left, he pauses on an experimental album long considered confounding by critics. The liner notes, scrawled in the margins, offer no answers, just lists of times, places, half-finished ideas for sonic experiments recorded with friends. The quiet in the room thickens, and the air feels close, layered by the scent of old vinyl and grease. Here, dream is not fantasy. It is labor, the slow practice of returning to a motif, the folding of a lyric so it sits just right. Album covers are spread on the carpet in geometric patterns, echoing the kinds of installations that later appear in gallery spaces, each one a conversation with color, composition, and memory. A faint record hiss fills the room as he leans back, fading in and out like breath. The mirror's glass offers no answers. The notebook's wire binding presses gently into his palm. There is a reflection in this layered process, a repeated truth found in the catalogues, that what we call dream is often a choreography of touch and repetition. It grows out of the same devotion that guides a finger along the edge of vinyl, that arranges photographs in quiet order, that lingers over smudges of makeup on a chipped compact. The dreamscape is not escape, it's arrival over and over, until the pieces name themselves quietly in the slowest hour before the world awakes, and when he stands, the costume fabric slipping across his shoulders, every surreal lyric, every experimental painting and collaged mask is there, rooted in the tactile world. Every object weighed, every image chosen with an attention that feels almost ceremonial. The room is unchanged. The mirror is still. Only the dream, made visible by repetition, remains. A dull reflection peers back, dawn's light collecting on the rim of the little mirror. Carl's fingertips brush the faint scratches across its surface, letting the chill of glass anchor him. He is not anywhere else. Nearby, a page rests quietly atop linen, corners curled with the memory of many mornings. The room's hush is shaped by soft fabric, a scarf folded over the arm of the chair, brushed lightly, a habitual gesture that quieted thought like smoothing a line in sand. The world recedes here, edges growing gentle. In this hush, he sees the space between two breaths, the subtle threshold where night's wandering meets the edge of what's real. Without hurry, the pad of his thumb presses the worn notebook closed, feeling the cover's roughness, and he waits, allowing any fragment of dream to shimmer quietly in the space above the page. He leans back, eyes moving from mirror to window, catching the dim outline of rooftops. The air holds an unlit scent, the last trace of sleep, mingled with a dry wisp of paper. It's here, before the clutter of daylight, that the bridge between doing and dreaming becomes almost visible. In a distant room, a record crackles, the sound too faint to follow. Still, Carl feels its resonance, a reminder that some music plays only in the mind for a while before finding form. Dawn's pale wash over the table gathers everything, objects, notes, his own gentle reflection, into one resting presence. It is not effort or even wish that draws inspiration near, but the silent readiness to receive. The world outside slows, matching his movement. Each touch is deliberate, yet without striving, as if nothing new needs to be made, only remembered, already waiting on the other side of waking. He sits still, hands folded loosely. A single slip of lyric falls from his lap, brushing the worn floor. His gaze lingers, not to claim an idea, but to consent to the unknown, sensing how a dream is both a well beneath and a sky above. The outer world rests for a moment on the fragile balance of Yesod, the place between foundation and vision, where what is felt, imagined, and almost grasped gently prepares to be born. There is no separation, only layers moving through him, a scar on the table, the uneven shadow inside the mirror, the stuff of ordinary mornings, becomes the first doorway. Every detail is allowed, not forced. The chipped compact resting on the sill, the harmonica dented by hours of practice, follows the same quiet law. They are simply what is, remembered and allowed by the dream. When his mind drifts, it carries the grace of permission. He does not need to command inspiration. He waits, gently affirming that, with every slow breath, the unseen is patiently becoming the seen. Some worlds, he knows, are approached not by crossing but by noticing. This layer, so faint and true, asks him to do less and receive more, resting in the certainty that whatever is imagined with devotion carries its own reason for arriving. He lets this assurance become a quiet invitation to the next morning and to every layer after, and so he lingers, the movement between becoming and unbecoming, trusting that the dream will gather itself not by force, but by quietly returning and returning again. There is a quiet heaviness in the dressing room, even before the city is fully awake. His slippers touch the linoleum floor, slow, deliberate, and the small lamp carved a pale island on the vanity's edge. The air is gentle, cool, carrying the calm of morning as his hand closes around the corner of a black wool scarf. Threads slightly rough, warm from being held. He straightens it where it drapes beside a notebook, careful, always returning things to their place. On the table, a stack of lyric pages, creased at the corners, some marked faintly with yesterday's coffee, holds the story of these final months. The handwriting remains bold, even as the lines occasionally tremble. He sits, smoothing the page, gaze soft and steady. Outside, barely a suggestion of dawn. Things move slowly here, every motion purposefully unrushed. It is late 2014 when the news arrives, unspoken outside family and the small circle he trusts. The diagnosis lands as a silence in the room, filling chest and corners with something unfamiliar. He does not share it with the world. Instead, the routine becomes a sanctuary, mornings with tea, evenings lost in studio lamplight, always returning to the same battered chair. A glass of water sits untouched beside him, the beads catching morning's gray light. In the crackling hush, he opens a thin, spiral-bound journal. The cover is worn, marked with faint makeup traces and a lost sticker from a past tour. He traces the edge, then lifts a pen, beginning again. There is no hurry, not anymore. He writes each lyric line slowly, lips forming silent shapes in the mirror. Marks pause, then continue. The air feels sacred, quiet, insistent, filled with the weight of creation shaped by knowing. Records lean just slightly on the shelf. He moves a battered harmonica into place, the metal cold under his thumb. Listening for soundless cues, he lets his breath settle. This ritual, not just for music, but for holding himself steady as the world outside his window expands, then recedes into narrow moments of energy and exhaustion. His illness winds itself into the room, sometimes invisible, sometimes filling it entirely, as if every object must bear a fraction of its presence. In these months, he is deliberate with every gesture. He wears coated denim, fabric soft where he rubs his hands along his thighs, warming them. Each rehearsal is measured, every note turned over and over on his tongue. There are days when he walks a little slower, rests longer, but he keeps returning. Behind the mirror, laughter from old bandmates sometimes drifts through the hallway, unhurried and steady, while he polishes a chipped makeup compact, making circular motions, letting his breath out in patient intervals. The recording of Black Star leads him, not away from illness, but deeper into the awareness of what remains undone. January comes, and with it the quiet anticipation that hangs in the dressing room, the space between footsteps, the pause before music fills the air. The album, released into the world just before his birthday, is both gift and farewell, a shape cut by time. Family keeps vigil, unseen but close, their presence anchoring mornings and long, slow evenings beside a window that frames the dawn. And when the moment arrives, in that first cold